This should be a fun one, I hope. We're going to go through, I love this title that I kind of came up with, like, is your dud feature a growth opportunity or a sunk cost? Basically, like helping you evaluate when to keep pushing on with a feature that you've launched that isn't maybe living up to your expectations, or when you should cut bait and move on to something else. And this is a core part of the product strategy course. Here's our agenda for today. I'll spend a little bit about me, about a minute or so, not too long. I get uncomfortable talking about myself for too long. Um, about 29-ish minutes on is your dud feature a growth opportunity or sunk cost? And then we'll spend some time at the end for Q&A. So as Paul was saying, like, get the questions in Q&A and upvote the ones that you think are good, or that basically align with the questions that you have, and then we'll, like, see what we get to at the end of the session. And I will uh, um, keep things moving here. We've got a lot of material to go through, but I'm hoping that the framework that we talk through should be helpful for you and give you a taste of some of the things that we talk about in the product strategy course. Just a couple things about me. I'm currently kind of a product advisor. I work with a lot of early stage companies, helping them with kind of their go-to-market and their kind of ways to find product market fit. I was the former CPO at Medium, the online publishing platform, and also at Outside Interactive. And then I was the VP product at Descript, and about 10 years ago, I was VP product at Twitter, way before it turned into X and basically, turned into what it is today. So had a lot of fun there. I'm currently advising a few companies that probably most of which you haven't heard of. Maybe you've heard of Readwise, which is a read it later and service for finding highlights from the things that you read in Kindle. And I'm an instructor for product strategy this fall, which is the course that some of the material in this presentation today comes from, and also for mastering product management. I've been a Reforge instructor for a few years. Really enjoy teaching the course to PMs and have a lot of fun with folks. I'm a longtime blogger, and I'm still blogging at sippey.com. So that's the best place to go. Follow me, and you can subscribe to the newsletter if you're so inclined. It's not, whatever. So here we go. Is your dud feature a growth opportunity or sunk cost? So I can't see everybody, and otherwise I'd be asked for a raise of hands, but you can do this in the privacy of your own home or your own cubicle or wherever you are. Raise your hand if this experience has ever happened to you, where you did the research, you define the feature, you align the teams, you design the experience, you ship the code, and then you have parties that look like stock images that you can find on Unsplash, where everybody is wearing hats and toasting each other with champagne in a quasi office environment, and you're really, really happy that you got this feature out. And then, fast forward a couple of weeks or a month or a quarter, and the same people who were wearing those party hats in that stock imagery from Unsplash now look like these sad stock photos also from Unsplash, where they're looking at charts and they're looking at customer feedback and they're looking at bugs and they're looking at what's actually happened with the feature. And all of that excitement that happened here basically now looks like this, and everyone's sad. There's a great XKCD comic about all of the different types of errors that you could be looking at. You could basically get to a bunch of arguments with your team around, is this a false positive, a false negative, a true positive for the wrong reasons, an incorrect result, which leads you to a correct conclusion due to unrelated errors, et cetera, or the type 9 error, which is the rise of Skywalker. So basically what I want to walk you through today is a framework that will help you kind of step back when you're in this kind of fog of war of being upset that the feature that you shipped isn't really performing, to really evaluate in a really clear-minded way how to think about where to go next, right? And because as product leaders, the goal here is about creating clarity for your teams and focus. And the framework that we're going to walk through today will help you just essentially structure your thinking about evaluating feature performance so that you can make really informed decisions about what to do with a feature that is potentially underperforming after you've shipped it. Okay. When you think about feature strategy in general, At an individual feature level, you've got kind of the qualitative definition of like the strategy of like, why are we actually building this? And then once it's shipped, you want to evaluate adoption of that feature, retention of that feature, user satisfaction of that feature. And then when you're doing essentially multi-feature strategy across an entire product, you can then start to map your matrix of features about how they're actually being used and adopted and loved by your users in order to then evolve your overall feature strategy. I'm going to focus really on these three pieces around adoption, retention, and user satisfaction. A lot of the things that we hit in the course are basically move on to like, how do you use this information to evaluate your feature matrix and your overall feature strategy? But for this, for our talk today, really going to focus on the adoption, retention, and user satisfaction piece. But all of these pieces along the train are really, really important when you think about how are we actually building a portfolio of features and where are we investing across the product? Because as you shift from kind of execution land into product strategy land, making those trade-off decisions is really important because now you're being asked to make prioritization around like, well, should we build this or should we build that? Or should we like invest here or should we invest there? And this framework of thinking about like, how are our features being used and how and do our customers love them really helps you kind of understand where you should be investing. So let's get into the framework. This is a really, really helpful and simple framework for thinking about an individual feature, and it's nicknamed TARS. I really wish I had had a slide about with TARS from the movie Interstellar, where you basically set his humor rating down to 80%. Maybe I'll try and adjust my humor rating at some point during this presentation. But TARS stands for Target, Adopted, Retained, and Satisfied. And we're going to walk through this and think about like where are the biggest drop-offs that happen to really understand strategies of how you can go improve features that you think are underperforming. So let's start first with active target users. One of the things that is important to think about when you're evaluating feature performance is who is this feature targeted at? And there's one thing to say like, well, we built this feature for a whole bunch of non-users so that we could attract them. But when you're looking at actual feature performance, you want to understand what percentage of our overall user base is this feature actually important for? I'll give you an example like at in a two-sided marketplace, and Medium was really a two-sided marketplace between readers and writers. Obviously, when we're developing features for writers, those features like the active target users were not the entire Medium user base. We were actually focused on a particular set of users, which were writers, and then we would develop features for a subset of those writers that were looking to do specific things. And so you're looking at like what percentage of your overall customer base is this feature targeted at? And really it's like the group of active users. So you only want to basically count active users that are most likely to get value from your feature, right? So, and this really should, when you're evaluating performance of a feature, you want to go back to your qualitative definition of your feature and your product brief for your PRD to say like, who were we targeting with this? And did we actually hit our target? Like, who did we think was actually going to get value for this feature? So then you want to take that and say like, all right, this is a percentage of our active users that are most likely to get value. So that's your target population, right? So that's where you start. Okay. And then because it probably for a lot of features isn't 100% of your active target of your active users. Your target users may be below that. So next, you want to move on to adoption. So we've shipped this feature. What percentage of our users have actually actively adopted this feature and are actually using this feature? So that is like you've got all of your users, all of your active target users, and then your active adopted users, right? And not all of your features get adopted in the same way. Like it may be that like people don't find it, people don't understand it, but like really understanding like, okay, of our entire user base, how many people are actually using this feature that we've shipped? I've had this happen so many times where it's like you ship this great new feature that you think is really going to change a user's life, and it turns out that like nobody finds it or nobody sees it, or the way that they actually see it is like the frequency that they're going to see it is like in that time they're never going to actually find it. So it's you really need to think about like how many people are actually adopting this feature. And there are a variety of tactics that you can use to go improve low adoption, right? So one is that like a lack of awareness, right? People don't know that the feature exists. And so there are lots of things you can do around marketing, email, in-app notifications, et cetera. Related to that is discoverability, where they don't know where the feature is and they can't use it. So you can move it to a more prominent location, do tutorials, think about how you can simplify your UI in order to make the feature more discoverable. Um, there can be high friction where it's too difficult to set up or use. And the tactics there, again, are around simplifying the feature and maybe even educating users on the benefit of like really explaining to them that even though this is going to take a little bit of work, it's totally worthwhile for you to go and do that. And then the hardest one is low value prop, right? Which is like you've essentially shipped this, but people aren't actually interested in that feature, right? So, and the tactic here is, well, maybe your target audience was wrong, and who you're actually trying to reach with this feature, you were way too broad. So maybe it's going back to the value prop of saying like, what problem are we solving and who are we solving it for? And thinking about that who really tightly in order to get to a better understanding of who is appropriate for this feature, because that can then impact your other tactics of like, maybe it shouldn't actually be moved to a more prominent location. Maybe it's all about marketing efforts and in-app notifications specifically for that audience segment to get them to discover this feature. So when you go back to like the TARS framework, it's like, all right, who's our target? How many folks have adopted? And these are tactics to improve low adoption. Now, once you have people that have adopted the feature and are actually using the feature, you move on to the R of this, which is retention, right? So this is active retained users for this feature, right? So, and this is going to get a little bit challenging and complicated because you may have a feature that people basically you're designing to only use once, but a lot of features you're setting with a natural periodicity of like how they're actually going to use it over time. So we had a stats feature in Medium for writers where you can actually go and see information about who's reading your blog and what posts are the most popular. And we knew that there's kind of a natural periodicity of like when people are actually going to be looking at those stats. And so you're looking at like, what do you think the right pattern is for how people are actually using it? And then what percentage of your users are using it on that basis to look at like that active retained user. Similar with I'm using a lot of Medium examples, and this is also true with Twitter. It's like some folks don't tweet every day, and so you want to essentially look at like what do you believe the right kind of periodicity is for using for tweeting or for posting on Medium, and then looking at the kind of retention of those users with that periodicity. But essentially, you want to be looking at what percentage of our active adopted users are retained and are coming back and using this feature at the pace that we think is the right pace for those folks using that feature. And then you want to look at like, all right, well, we've got some low retention. What do we do with that? It could be that you have a buggy feature, right? That you can't deliver recurring value because of functionality issues or friction, right? So this is where you do the hard work with your engineering and your design partners, and you go through support tickets and user research and look at user behavior and identify those prevalent and painful bugs and go fix them and see if that actually will up your usage and retention. Cannibalization is interesting, where it's like users turn to another feature instead of using this one to solve their problem, right? So there's different ways of, I'll give you one example where let's say that you have, it's an interesting thing around like favoriting. So take a social media platform that supports both favoriting and bookmarking, right? So a like or a bookmark. And we found that like a lot of people at Twitter back, this is 10 years ago before we had the bookmark feature, were using the favorite feature, the like feature as a way to essentially save a great tweet for themselves. And you can imagine when they launched the bookmark feature that you have some people that are actually using the bookmark feature now to save tweets for themselves, and it could cannibalize likes, which are intended as a expression back to the actual creator of the tweet. So you could have some cannibalization of those features. And so what you need to do then is really focus on educating users on the distinct value of each feature, or potentially roll back the less valuable one if it's basically confusing users and complicating the user experience. And then finally, again, similar to the adoption one, it could just be a dud that this feature doesn't solve the user problem, right? So when you go back to your qualitative definition of what your feature was and your PRD, and you're saying like, what problem are we solving and who are we solving it for? It turns out that this feature may not solve the user problem. You're going to learn that through, again, through user research, support tickets, and data. And it may be that you need to roll this feature back because it just isn't solving the problem that you wanted to solve. So that's retention. Finally, we have satisfaction. So we've got our target, we've got active adopted users, we've got our retained users. Now we want to know of our retained users, do they actually like it? Like, does it actually work for them? Are they happy with it? So this is where I think like people don't spend enough time thinking about the S in here. It's really, data-oriented PMs will be like, all right, well, we've got this, we've got our numbers, we've got our retention curves, we're looking at our active retained users, and they don't spend enough time thinking about like, how does this feature make someone feel? And do they actually enjoy using it? And is it productive for them to be using this feature? And a tactic that Reforge recommends and that I've actually used in the past is a customer effort score. So you can instrument your product so that after someone completes a task with the feature that you're actually looking at, to ask a really simple question. Overall, how easy was it to solve your problem after you used this feature today? Very difficult, difficult, neither, easy, very easy. We would essentially put this customer effort score question. I've used this at Descript, I use this at Medium, where you sprinkle this question throughout the product in different places, and you use tools to make sure that you're not like constantly spamming people with this question, to essentially understand what is their satisfaction and customer effort with this particular feature. And then you can ask a follow-up question about, give us like an open-ended like description. Sometimes we would use this and find the people that found it difficult, and we would actually call them up and do user research with them. But you get a really great kind of trending score of like, are people actually like, is it actually easy to actually use this feature, and how much effort are they actually spending? So when you get to low satisfaction, you could have like a hidden detractor, which is like a high retention, low satisfaction feature where people have to use it, right? So features that users have to use out of necessity, even though they're frustrating, right? And so where you have lots of people using this feature and lots of retention, but they basically hate it every time that they do it. And I think that these features become a business risk for you, because it's the thing that's like, well, I have to pay for this product and I have to use it, but I hate using it. And I'm sure that everyone has a product in their life where it's like, yeah, I have to continue to use this product, but God, it just sucks. I can name lots of expense platforms that I've used in the past that I won't name them by name, but that essentially feel like this, right? Where I have to use it out of necessity, even though it's incredibly frustrating. Um, and then there could be that you have features that are a dud, right? Which is like low retention, low satisfaction, where again, the feature doesn't solve the user problem and people hate it, right? Like, so roll it back. Um, and this is like the combination of all of these things, active users, like who's your real target, your adopted users or retained users, and your active satisfied users, gives you an overall picture for an individual feature of where your problems are, right? Because it could be that like, look, our target is this, but our active is at 40%. We need to work on before, like, don't even worry about these numbers. Like, we need to focus on active adopted users. Like, where is your biggest drop off? We'll point you to where you should be spending your time as a team to think about where you should be investing in this product. It also gives you insight into whether it's actually worth investing in this feature anymore. So let's go forward for a second. So, and that leads you to essentially like four different iteration directions for a feature. You could um, optimize it, right? It's delivering some value, but it has some room for improvement, right? This is where it's like we've got the adoption, but we maybe have a low customer effort score, and we maybe have some low retention, and it's like, but we're going to just go optimize this feature. It's definitely delivering some value, but has room for improvement. You've got the redesign, right? Which is like the feature missed the mark and likely has large unidentified gaps to fill, which is like, you know that this is a real problem that we need to solve, and people are finding the feature, but then they completely drop off on retention. Um, and this is like, all right, let's go redesign this feature. You've got the move on, like, all right, everything, our TAR scores are all good. We're hitting our target. Our active is like within a reasonable rate of like what we're doing to market this, and our retention and satisfaction numbers are good. So you know what? Like, we don't need to actually invest in this anymore. And that's another thing to actually just keep in mind, which is sometimes when you develop this feature, it's like really it's really tempting to be like, well, we had this like long roadmap of things that we want to do to improve this feature. But if you're hitting this thing and you're solving the customer problem, it may be time to just move on to another type of problem that it's not actually worth continuing to invest in, because like you did the job, you solved the problem. Go find another problem for this customer, and another area to invest in your product. And then the final one is rolling back, where it's like this isn't solving the problem, and it is causing bad UX and hurting downstream metrics. And I'll tell a quick, sort of embarrassing story. But when I was at Twitter, we made a mistake on a feature that we shipped to the block functionality, where we had a whole bunch of research and customer insight about the effects that block had on both sides of people that were blocking and the people that were not, that were being blocked, and the challenges that it was causing for folks. And so we changed the feature to be more like what is now Twitter has both block and mute, but we changed this is before we had mute. We changed the feature from block to mute. And within 24 hours, we had a massive pushback from a large portion of our user base, and it created a really bad user experience for them that was which was horrible, and it hurt downstream metrics. And we had to very publicly roll it back within about 36 hours of actually shipping the feature, and kind of go back to the problem statement and kind of look at this with fresh eyes. And so I had to write a blog post that actually like explained what we did. But it really created, even with like the best intentions of what we were trying to do with the feature, we had a bunch of, we basically were solving the wrong problem for the wrong audience. And we learned that once we actually shipped it. And it was important for us to essentially like, instead of fix forward, we just decided to roll back and revert to the previous behavior. All of this leads to essentially like a real, conversation about sunk costs, right? So I love this illustration. Like, we need to cut the dead weight or we'll sink. And then someone is like, no, 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 we spent a lot of money to buy that weight. And you have to think about this in terms of feature development and what you've actually done. So sunk cost is, you can do lots of Googling about the sunk cost fallacy. I'm sure there's many, many Wikipedia pages about it, but essentially it says, look right on the decision tree and what are you actually deciding to do moving forward? And how do you actually like ignore the things that you've spent in the past, only think about future opportunity? And I'll close here with on this part with just a book recommendation, which is this book Quit, which I think is kind of like, you could pair this. You could buy Angela Duckworth's book Grit, and then you could buy Andy Duke's book Quit and put them side by side on your bookshelf. Because there's a false narrative that the people who persevere are the heroes of the story and the quitters are the losers. The result is that we stick to things that aren't worthwhile because we think that it's synonymous with character. And so it's really important to know when to walk away. Annie is has been a professional poker player. And this book is kind of a mind-blowing exploration of what it means to decide that you know what? It's not worth investing in this anymore, and it's time to move on. So highly recommend that book. Um, all of this material comes from the product strategy course, which starts September 12th. This course is really designed for product leaders that are transitioning from focusing on execution. Ugh, typo in my slides drives me crazy. Focusing on execution to focusing on strategy. Folks that are now responsible for, or are going to shortly be responsible for managing a portfolio of feature work. So really think about like this, the transition from senior PM to group PMs or directors of heads of product, where you have to think about the entire feature portfolio strategy for your product. And what it helps you do is it like learn and apply frameworks for building, communicating, and executing a detailed product strategy spanning feature work, growth work, innovation work, and scaling work. The course was developed by Casey Winters, who's a product advisor and formerly of Eventbrite, Pinterest, and Grubhub, and Fareed Masavat, who was formerly at VP at Reforge and actually a senior director at Slack. The course material is fantastic. And the great thing about me as an instructor leading this thing is that I get to like pick apart the things that I agree with and disagree with in their frameworks. And then we use that to drive case studies and discussions with product leaders from around the Valley to really bring this stuff to life and illustrate the concepts. We do this over 4 weeks. Week 1 is feature strategy. Some of the material that we talked about today comes from this. And we're bringing in a featured guest to talk about kind of AI features in the product that he developed here. Growth strategy. We're bringing in someone from Notion to talk about how they're growing their product and thinking about growth strategy. Product market fit expansion. When do we expand our product offering to serve new use cases or new markets? Really important thing is you grow. And we're talking with a leader at Slack about how they expanded into new use cases for customers. And then finally, how do you really scale and communicate a product strategy inside an organization? And Casey, who's one of the creators of the course, will be joining us for the 4th week. So what we do in the live sessions, if you haven't taken a Reforge course, is we don't really do like the teaching like I just did today. What we do, we assume that you're going to go read the materials on your own and come prepared with questions. And what we do is we bring in experts and we talk about the material in the context of live product work and things that they've actually done in their careers. And we bring it to life and tell like, you know, the true horror stories of like what actually happens when you're doing this type of work. And that's the thing that I love to do as an instructor, is do my best to bring this material to life and make it real for people. And, you know, essentially like tell stories about how we all make mistakes and how we're all learning on the job. So with that, maybe we have some questions. Hi, Paolo. Oh, I can see you again. That's so lovely.
Yes,
Now I'm just
we
not
definitely
talking.
do have
Now I'm just not
questions.
talking to my monitor and my old slides. Should I stop
I'm back.
sharing, or what should we do here?
Yeah, you can yeah, you can stop sharing and then I can
Great,
ask some of the questions that I'm seeing here.
cool.
So looking at the most upvoted, folks are asking questions and upvoting. So we have a question from Jeremy. How do you go about deciding the periodicity for the retention part? You know, users are retained if they use feature X times and Y period.
Yeah. Great question. There's I think I love this question because it's sort of like art and science. One is you're going to go in with an assumption of like when we designed this feature and we did the research, we learned that users have this type of product every day, every week, every hour, every month. Think about like I'll take a simple example of like an accounting. I use QuickBooks, right? So as a small business owner, I use QuickBooks Online. I do not run profit and loss statements every day, right? That is not a daily activity. I run reports probably every month to look at like balance sheet, profit and loss statement. And so when if you're the PM for the reporting feature inside QuickBooks and you're looking at like what is the retention of users of that feature, you're probably not going to say like, God, I really wish we had more daily active users of the profit and loss report, right? You're going to want to say like, oh, I need to make sure that people are actually running this monthly or on a regular basis. So you're going to take that intuition that you have based on what you know about your customers and the research you've done and the problems that you're trying to solve for them and how they go and solve them and when they go and solve them and all the things that you learn doing when you're actually designing features. And then you're going to back that up with data. Then you're going to look and say like, well, how often are people doing it? And in a case where the people are successful and they're retaining, what is the periodicity that you're using it? This becomes challenging because you may have some features that you're only essentially like, let's say a monthly feature. It takes more time to measure retention of a new feature that is used less frequently, right? So that's sort of a problem that, like, and that's where it's like you're going to have to use a little bit of like your gut and a little bit more customer research to understand, are we having problems with this? If our retention drops off really quickly after 2 months, it's like, well, we may need to look at this for a longer period of time. So, um, but this is where it's like more, I think that product intuition is something that's built by more repeated interactions with customers. And so the more that you're talking with folks, the more you're going to be able to make kind of the judgment calls of like, yeah, this doesn't smell right, right? We need to go investigate this. But it is kind of this mix of what are you thinking about from a research perspective and what does the data say in order to like figure out what that retention curve should look like.
And we've got a related question from Carolyn here. How would you recommend a PM team go through this analysis or process? Is it a basic practice for your PMs in their day-to-day job, or is it something that is done every quarter, year to inform the next
Great.
quarter
Yeah,
for you?
that's a great question. I don't, I look at this as like, uh, you, it's probably not a day-to-day thing to be looking at TARs, right? There's probably other more important metrics, and you think about your kind of driver tree of metrics of like what are the things that are driving outcomes for the business that I think you're going to want to be looking at it on a daily or weekly basis. I think this is an important thing to be thinking about, maybe on a quarterly basis of looking like when you look at the overall, one of the things we talk about in the course is like doing this for a whole portfolio of features, and then how do you evaluate one feature against another and look at like where should you be investing and where are the things that you should maybe be killing and maybe be invest like, you know, either rolling back or killing or, you know, deciding like we're not investing in this area anymore. And that's definitely not a daily activity. That's probably a quarterly or an annual activity of looking at the entire, you know, basket. I think that when you ship a new feature, you're doing a whole bunch of things to understand, like, is this new feature successful, right? So I think this framework is really useful for the first quarter or two after you ship a new feature. And you may be looking at it more frequently in order to adjust tactics on a sprint by sprint basis of like, oh, we got to fix these bugs. We got to understand, like, yeah, people are finding it too hard to use. We're getting a lot of support tickets on it. We need to make it more discoverable. How do we actually market this to people so that you can actually like know in a reasonable amount of time that it was actually worth investing in and like what you should go from here. So I look at this as like not doing this on every single feature all the time, but when you launch a new feature, thinking about like, how do you do this in the, you know, first, you know, 4, 8, 12 weeks of a new feature being live. And then on a regular basis to look at like, are people actually using these features across the portfolio and um, how do we actually like, where do we go invest?
Now, let's talk about new features. How do you recommend tackling the challenge of setting goals for retention, adoption, and maybe even satisfaction up front for something that's completely
Mm,
new? You have
mm,
nothing to compare it with,
mhm.
and you want to set targets for a successful rollout.
uh, so part of it is like looking at historical things of like what have we been able to do in the past, right? Um, part of it relies on like how strategically important is this feature to the value proposition of the product. So if you go back and you like, let's say you're launching a, I'm gonna take an extreme example. Like we had a whole bunch of complaints and customer support tickets about our like password reset flow, right? You know, name something that's, you know, this is an extreme example. Like, and you're gonna go fix that because like it's just grit in the machine and it's just causing problems for customers, but it's definitely not strategically important. So your goals for that are like, look, we're gonna fix this. We don't really, it's not about like how many people are actually using it. We just want to make this so that when people do discover it, like the customer effort score is like off the charts and it's super easy for someone to like add Google Auth to their account or change their password or blah, 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 whatever it is. Um, if there are features that are, if you're launching a new feature that is strategically important to the value proposition of the product, then I think you really want to be like, okay, this is our target population, like really being clear about this is targeted at, if it's really strategically important, 100% of our customer base or 80 to 90% of our customer base. And setting a goal that within N days of launch, that people are aware of that and have discovered that feature, right? So that we want like, so it's targeted at 80% of our customers. We want within 14 days of launch. And I would give yourself like a time window. Like I always find that time is a really great constraint to really focus the mind of your cross-functional partners of like within 14 days of like I'm making things up. Within 14 days of launch, we want 60% of our customers to have actually discovered and used the feature at least once. What does that mean? That means that like that's going to drive in-app discovery. That's going to drive potentially like email notifications. That's going to drive like marketing activities. That's going to drive all sorts of things. That could drive like we're going to have to do a bunch of webinars to like train people about this feature, or we're going to have to do whatever to like explain the value. It sort of like depends on what feature you're rolling out, and you should have an idea of like, yeah, this feature is super important for the workflow of our customers, right? Like this is the thing that actually matters. So we're going to put it like front and center. And then, again, like within N days, so within 14 days, we're going to hit X. And then within N days, we're going to have a retention rate, based on, again, the periodicity of how people are using it. I think it really is like, it's a little bit of art and science of like thinking about who your customers are, how are you going to reach them, what is that target, who's that target customer, and like how ambitious are you being based on this on the strategic importance of this feature. But the key thing that I would say is like use time as a constraint because then it actually forces the conversation with how you're going to do things and how you're going to get people aware of it within particular time. And it like people need a deadline, right? Like it gets the clock ticking. Like you ship a feature and like, hey, it's been 14 days and we haven't hit our thing. Why? And you go back, well, we didn't ship this, we didn't do this, we didn't do a push notification, we didn't do email, we didn't do a thing, we didn't educate people. Okay, well, like, what are we going to do? We don't know if it's a dud because our goal is to get adoption first to understand. And so, like, it's like really focusing on that. And then so I think, like, basically using those types of goals. And then you can say, like, I think the customer effort score is an easy one to set a goal around because it's like, yeah, we want people to find this, like, 80% of people to find this, like, easy or, marginally easy, whatever, along that scale of 4 or 5. Um, and so, but I would start first with like, let's get people in and using this feature within a particular amount of time.
This next question is actually almost like a double click on
Mhm.
this. So Alora wants to know, let's think about the B2B environment where there's a
Mhm.
distinction between the purchaser versus the end
Mm.
user. How would you increase the adoption of features that are valuable to the purchaser or buyer, but have minimal value to the end user?
It's great. This is where it's like, I love this because this gets back to just your target, right? Which is, you've got features, let's say like, I'll pick on Slack, right? Which is like, you've got features which are just about like managing the people that are in the team, right? And understanding like the behavior of them and turning users on or off or integrating with your, single sign-on system, blah, 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 blah. Those are for the buyer, right? Like understanding like performance of a thing or like, the kind of meta view of like what it is. And that's where like it could be really strategically important, right? That it's like this is a super important thing for us to go do because it really drives adoption and sales. It removes roadblocks for our sales team to actually have these features and be able to say like, yes, it's like, like SOX compliance. Like there's all sorts of things that are like, those types of things that become like not features that end users care about, or that like you're going to have a customer effort score that people are going to be like, yeah, God, I really, really love that admin feature, but that are really important for the buyer. But just have to be honest with yourself that like your target in terms of percentage of population is really, really small. And then it's like, then you can just go through that same example of like, well, our target is small. That's okay. What percentage of our target is actually adopted? Like, is it like, if this is super important for them and it's super important for us to go sell this, like, you can go through that same, you can go through the exact same exercise. It's just being honest with yourself about like, yeah, it's a small target audience, but it is super strategically important for us because of X or Y or Z, because it needs to drive revenue, because we can't get into this new segment without it. And that's where some of the things that we talk about in the course around like the product strategy compass is like, how do you explain to people this is our strategy and this is why we're doing these features that are for a small number of people, because this is like strategically important for us. And like being able to communicate that as a product leader is really, really important, because otherwise you're going to get whipsawed by people that are like, yeah, this is only for like 5 users. Who cares? Why are we doing this? It's like, yeah, because like those 5 users unlock an entirely new market segment for us.
So I've got one last question for you
Right.
as we're on the 45 minute mark. So Katie asks, let's continue on this thread of low adoption. How do you decide when to lean on marketing versus when to build in more discoverability within the product to
Hmm.
address low adoption?
Uh, I'm going to do a why not both. Um, I'm going to do a why not both because I think that there's there's always there's always room for improvement of user experience in a product. Like there just always is. Like you can always like make that better. And there's always room for like essentially better education. And so I think that you're it's really about thinking about it in terms of cost and is it worth the effort? So it's really easy as an outsider to be like, yeah, we should redesign the product so that this individual feature is easier to find. And it could be that it's like way too expensive to go do that because like it's going to move a whole bunch of other things around and could cause a bunch of like knock-on downstream effects that are bad. And so if that cost is too high, then yeah, let's go lean on marketing and we'll do more email and we'll do webinars to explain what the feature is and we'll get people into it, right? So versus no, we got to redesign the product to make it more discoverable. I think that again, it comes back to like what is your target? If your target for this feature is really, really big and it's a lot of your users and people aren't finding it, then that's a real challenge for kind of user experience and leaning on product design. If your target is smaller and people aren't discovering it, it could be that like it's not worth the effort to go invest in a redesign to make that feature more discoverable because your target is smaller. And so that's where you can actually lean on marketing to say like, hey, let's do some targeted outreach and understand like why are they not discovering it? How are they not discovering it? Are there things that we could do to make it better? So I think like thinking about that in that context of like who is our target, and if it's really broad and it's like our whole base, and this is a strategically important feature, and people aren't finding it, yeah, then maybe it's time to like think about like how do we make this more discoverable for people?
All right. Well, on that note, Michael, thank you so much for
Yeah,
going over this product strategy session with everybody. And thank you, everybody, for submitting such great questions throughout. Again, I'll be sending out a recording of the session and the slides to everybody that registered after this. Otherwise, we'll wrap this up and everybody have a great day. Take care.
thanks everybody.